Hello, everybody. Once again, my name is Neil with Portal to Ascension. Thank you, Linda. She's hailing in from Ottawa. We got Vic from Virginia. And today is going to be an amazing all-day conference on the weaponization of food. And the thought of this conference has really been kind of going around in my head for the last 4 to 5 years. I tried this 5 years ago and I only had 10 people registered. So I realized not that many people were very much interested in this. Of course, we're all interested in our health and stuff, but it wasn't really doing as well as, the other things we do on extraterrestrials and ancient history. So I was just waiting really for a time that I felt the collective would be ready for something like this. And I think it's now. We have quite a few signups. So let me introduce my co-host who's going to be with me throughout the day and also is really integral part to this event because he actually helped me staff this event and get some speakers for it. So, hey, Justin, how you doing, brother?
Good, Neil. Good, Neil. Great to be here. I'm really excited about today. I think we're going to have a lot of awesome information for people.
Exactly, man. And the real intention about like the weaponization of food isn't just to be like, hey, here's our food and it's been weaponized, we're screwed. It's really about the solutions of it. And the truth is the food has been weaponized on some level, whether it's intentional or kind of like just trying to cut corners and save some money, which some companies are too, and not looking at us from a holistic perspective of what effect it has on our consciousness, our emotions, our hormones, our diets, right, has really affected us big time. And I think conversations like this, bro, is what we really need to start doing in order to shed some light on it.
Certainly, yeah. And those familiar with the not so nice forces infiltrating our world will be aware of the fact that it's a full spectrum dominance. It's an agenda that seeks to undermine every aspect of life. So one of the things that we need, they like to undermine our fundamental human needs. So instead of learning how to become more free and prosperous and enlightened, we have to spend our time worrying about our health and things like this. So learning how to gain health freedom not only gives you the tools to be healthy, but it literally calms your mind down. Psychologically, you're going to experience less stress. That's going to translate into more health, more vitality, more inspiration, more positivity. And you're just going to feel like a better person. So yeah, I'm really excited about this information.
Yeah. What I've noticed is that a lot of times, when people have maybe depression, anxiety, a lot of times it comes from, your childhood and other emotional traumas. But what I'm realizing now from my own experience is that a lot of times it actually comes from the food that we're eating.
Yes.
So it's just throwing us off and we are looking in the wrong places in order to heal it. And sometimes we might spend years trying to figure it out spiritually when it might have just been a dietary shift.
Exactly. And there's everybody needs healing. We all have issues that we brought in from childhood and things like this. Everybody needs that healing. And if your body is fighting you because it's not getting the food it needs and things like this, then that can definitely affect your healing, your emotional well-being. And that's why I'm really excited about the speakers we have today because they're what I would argue is holistic health practitioners. They're not just focusing on one aspect of health. They have an eclectic array of knowledge to offer. And so, these are the kind of information that you're going to absorb, and you're going to find yourself feeling more and more empowered as you begin to understand and comprehend what you're seeing. So
yeah, seriously. And I feel super blessed because over the last 10 years of me trying to figure out health and consciousness, I realized that there's almost 2 levels of health awareness. There's conscious, which is like a kind bar at the store, right? Like, and then there's conscious of being conscious, which is like this level that supersedes what they're telling you is healthy.
Exactly.
Some people think Diet Coke is conscious because they're like, oh, I'm not trying to do sugar anymore, but it's really about the fact that it's interesting to me that the products that they've been pushing out there to be health conscious really are as bad, if not worse than, what they're saying is bad.
Exactly. And this is why it's so important to develop what I call key knowledge and understanding. I mean, if you really want to know what you're eating, what you're doing is healthy, in today's world, you really got to become your own expert. And while that's challenging, it takes time to do that for sure. But the sooner you start that, the better. Yeah. And that's why events like this are so important, because they literally give you the knowledge you need to actually know what a healthy life looks like. And therefore you can take control back in your life and be empowered again.
Seriously. And this, to everybody joining us now, and all the people watching the replay, this webinar is a resource for you to go back to at any point that you want. We're going to go over some really amazing information today. 2 of the presenters had to pre-record earlier this week because something came up for the weekend. Adam's going to be the only live presenter. We may have a couple of guests coming in. And then, of course, Justin and I are here. So it'll be around maybe 5 to 6 hours. We might go a little over if we're engaged in discussion or conversation. And if you want to ask questions at any point, guys, I know a couple of them are going to be pre-recorded, but please do ask your question in the Q&A area. If you can look at the Zoom platform, there's a Q&A button at the bottom. Ask your question and maybe we can answer it, or or get it answered for you, or shed some light on it, have a discussion about that question. So please do engage with us. And since we're live on Facebook, we have about 50 people watching live on Facebook. So hey to everybody over there. And what we're going to go into first is going to be our first presenter, Adam. And why don't you take it away, Justin, and tell us a little bit about Adam.
Sure. Well, I had the fortunate pleasure of meeting Adam last year. He's focuses on a great many things. He's like a lot of the people who are really doing amazing work in the community. They have a holistic approach. They want to know about health. They want to know about, conspiracy. And what I really appreciate about Adam is that he has a very deep level of research. He's not just satisfied with surface level understanding. He wants to get to the core, and he's constantly reassessing his body of knowledge to make sure it's complete, make sure it agrees with science. And he pulls from all sorts of different sources. So, as far as I'm concerned, I've been studying health for 10 years. Health is the thing that woke me up. And, when I want good health advice, when I want to check my knowledge, which admittedly, I think I've got a pretty good amount of knowledge to work with when it comes to health because I have a science background and things like this. Adam just blows me away. I'm like humbled every time I talk to him. So I'm just I'm so excited to bring Adam on. His company is Dragonfly Effect Naturals. I've been working with him to help get his amazing products out there. So definitely check his stuff out. He's got amazing work that he's been doing. And I'm just so excited to have a good friend of mine, Adam Riva, come on.
So Adam, let's bring you on, brother.
Hello, gentlemen. I feel a little bit inadequate with my facial hair today, but it's good to be with you here today.
You're good company.
Yep. Dude, we're really excited to have you on, bro, and I'm really glad to be connected with you and meet with you. The first couple, the conversations we've had, I could tell that you have a lot of information. Justin's also told me that you speak on other things, not just health as well. So excited to see what that's going to manifest into in the future. Why don't you go ahead and tell us what you're going to be talking about first, because you're doing 2 presentations today, right?
Yeah, that's correct. So today I'm going to be presenting on global pesticide crisis, which has many different aspects that most people don't consider. I think a lot of people are starting to become aware of the overuse of pesticides and its adverse health effects on the population. But there's going to be some information we're going to get into today, which is going to blow people out of the water. The second presentation I'm going to give is about the microbiome, which for the layman, that's basically just the bacteria that make up this beautiful body, this organism. It's really a collection of organisms. We're more of a community than we are an individual organism. And so the health of the community and the integrity of the community is something which is going to play a critical factor or a critical role in your overall health, your immune system, your mood, your body's natural defenses, everything like that. So I can start with just an introduction to who I am and my background, if that helps.
Yeah, let's do that.
So before we dive in, as Justin said, my name is Adam Riva, and I am of dauntlessdialogue.com. You can find my work there. The vast majority of my audience does not know me for health, ironically. That, as Justin said, health is what got him into this movement. The only reason I'm here today talking with you fine gentlemen is because of my awakening with health and what I call the suppression of natural cures by the pharmaceutical industry. And this is a vast topic with many different branches, but when you get into this information and you realize that there are, cures out there that are being suppressed or information that's being suppressed, or worse, we can talk about some of the holistic doctors that have been targeted. It starts to piss you off a little bit. And as they say, the truth will set you free, but first it'll piss you off. And we're not here today to piss you off. We're not here today to fear monger. We are here today to talk about concrete solutions that are easily applicable in your everyday lives so you can begin to reap the benefits of a healthy life. And yes, just a quick note on why we're talking about health in general. Today's entire lineup of speakers we're going to be talking about holistic health. And the reason that is so important is because this is a system. So Justin mentioned the word holistic. When we're talking about health, we have to come from a holistic standpoint, because the human body is obviously the mind, body, spirit complex. We're not just talking about, you know, how your organs function or how your brain works. We're getting into the various layers of your physiology, of your chakra system, your meridians, and so on and so forth. And these, you know, the integrity of these systems ultimately will converge to help you be a conscious creator. And so consciousness and health are kind of inexorably intertwined. And so I've never done this before, but I'm going to try to share my screen so we can go through.
Yeah, go for it, Adam. You are in full control. So I'll just be in the background, and really excited about everything. Go ahead and take it away.
Excellent. Can you guys see my screen, or?
Yeah, I can see your screen. I think everybody probably can.
All right, let me turn this. Okay, forgive my amateurness. All right, so is that going? There we go.
Yeah, there you go. Beautiful.
Okay, awesome. Back on track. Today we're talking about the global pesticide crisis, and more importantly, how each and every one of us can thrive in a toxic world. So we're going to start our conversation by talking about agrochemicals. What is that? These are chemicals that are mass produced on an industrial scale for the agricultural industry. The number one word I want you guys to familiarize yourself with is biocide. Now, bio obviously comes from the root word meaning life, and side is extermination. If you want to wrap your head around that, just think about the word, you know, infanticide or genocide. You're exterminating a group of people. Well, this is kind of what we're referring to. So herbicides are going to exterminate herbs and different plants. Pesticides are going to work on pests, i.e. Things that are consuming crops. Insecticides, same thing. And then fungicides are going to work on fungus. Now, the thing is, a lot of these various biocides have a lot in common on a chemical level. Now, they might vary in their molecular structure, but what they have in common is that they are all targeting different types of life forms to wipe them out. Let me tell a quick anecdote. I was having a conversation with my grandmother a few years ago, and I was trying to explain to her what organic farming is all about. She had never heard of it. And I said, this is nothing new. Organic farming is the type of farming that you grew up with, Grandma. It's just that in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, we saw this exponential increase in reliance on these different superphosphate fertilizers, as well as various biocides. And so really what organic farming is, and I'm sure most of our listeners are totally aware of this, is it's just a return to the old way of farming. It's a return to what is considered a natural type of farming. And so one of the things is that there's individuals, bad apples out there who are taking full advantage of the revolving door that seems to exist between government regulatory bodies and the agricultural industry, or the various industries that these so-called watchdog groups are supposed to look after. So I included this guy in my presentation, Michael Taylor, who worked at Monsanto for 16 months. Monsanto, I'm sure, again, most of our listeners are totally aware, but I'm going to just explain anyway. Monsanto is a biotech company that really is at the helm of the ship. They're potentially the largest company in this sector. They were actually recently acquired by Bayer, curiously enough. Bayer, the pharmaceutical company. So now we're starting to see a further blurring of the lines between pharmaceuticals and the food supply. And we can get into that throughout the course of the day and why that is the case. Food should be there to be medicine, right? The old expression, let thy food be thy medicine. Well, Michael Taylor was the deputy commissioner for the FDA for 6 years. Many people argue that he helped ensure legal passage to get glyphosate, which we'll get into, and other different agrochemicals to be approved. This is corruption, plain and simple. These individuals often leave their positions at these companies, take gigantic salary packages or severance packages, and then go to work for these companies that are supposed to be looking over the industry. When we're talking about agrochemicals, I want to really stress the importance of the abundance and the ubiquity of these agrochemicals. So 1 billion pounds are sprayed every single year in America. Now, that's the latest number, but this number is increasing every single year. Pesticide residue has been found on 11% of organic crop samples. We're going to get into the reasons why that is a little later on. There are natural alternatives to these harsh herbicides, pesticides. Some of them are available just commercially at your local Home Depot or your local Lowe's Hardware. They're deterrents. They're different than biocides insofar as they're not going to necessarily kill the life in the farm. They're going to act more to keep certain things away. And that's a critical distinction. So a couple of the most common agrochemicals, or at least pesticides and herbicides used today, and just for the sake of conversation, for brevity, from this point forward, I'm going to use the word pesticides because that's what most people are familiar with. There is a distinction between pesticides, herbicides, fungicides that I'm well aware of. When I use that word moving forward, I'm just kind of using it as an umbrella term. So the most common pesticides in use today are glyphosate, atrazine, dacthal, permethrin, and chlorophos. Most people have never heard of chlorpyrifos. It's actually going to be, keep it on your radar. It's going to be the topic of much conversation moving forward, the way that glyphosate and atrazine are today. Chlorpyrifos is on the rise, and it's recently been linked to a host of various adverse health effects. You can see right here that all of these pesticides come with a host of side effects. Now, some of them are carcinogens, meaning they are cancer causing. Some of them are phthalates. Phthalates is a word you should be familiar with. It's basically they're often called gender bender chemicals. So gender bender chemicals disrupt the endocrine system. Your endocrine system is a system of 10 different glands that produce hormones that perform various functions in the body. You have about 50 different hormones. However, some of the most well-known ones are testosterone, estrogen, things of that nature. And these are really strong determining factors in our morphology, meaning the way that our bodies form, but also in our behavior and our mental processes. So if you're taking a gender bender chemical, or if there's gender bender chemicals in the food supply, or in the air, or in the water supply, what do you think that is doing to our generation? What do you think that is doing to the global population? Again, a topic that we'll get into a little later on. So there's neurotoxins. Permethrin is a potent neurotoxin. Chlorpyrifos is not only a carcinogen, it's also a neurotoxin. And so a lot of these cause multiple types of harm to the body, as we'll see. The next word that I want to familiarize you with is mutagen. A mutagen is any chemical agent or radiation that can cause genetic mutations. Mutagens are ubiquitous. They are everywhere. And unfortunately, even if you're living the perfect healthy lifestyle with the perfect diet, you're still being exposed to mutagens on a daily basis. Mutagens, there are even mutagens in most types of foods that people would consider just normal and natural. On average, human beings are exposed to about 800 different mutagenic hits to their DNA every single hour. Now, fortunately, you have millions of nucleotides in your DNA strands. So, 800 is not really a big number. And just because something is mutated doesn't necessarily mean it's harmful. There's 3 types of mutations. There's going to be the, let's say, adverse mutation, which everyone kind of understands, something goes wrong in your body. There's neutral mutagens, something that basically causes a gene to express in a different way. You have genes that determine your hair color. So if you changed the genes behind your hair color, that wouldn't necessarily harm you. And then lastly, there are actually beneficial mutations. Those are very rare. I want to just point that out, but they do exist, and they're in the scientific literature. And so just a simple little tip, get your citrus. Citrus has actually been shown to have the most DNA protective effects of any food group. And it begins to work just 2 hours postprandially, and that just means after a meal. So within 2 hours of eating citrus, you will have your DNA protected. Now, hundreds of studies, if not thousands, I didn't care to count them all, have been published, and these are often randomized trials, peer-reviewed trials that look at various health effects of different pesticides on either rodent populations, or sometimes they'll even do what are called in vitro experiments, which is taking human cells and putting them into a petri dish. Because of ethics boards, many experiments are forbidden for obvious reasons, but they can do experiments on human tissues in petri dishes, which gives us some indication of how it will actually act in the body. Ambush, Teflon, Blazer Roundup, 2,4-D-amine, Crossbow, Galacron, Pramitol, and Pondmaster have all been demonstrated to be mutagens, again, to damage your DNA and cause mutations. And again, just to reiterate, I know we're going through a lot of the bad. Stay with us. We'll get to the good stuff. You have to understand the problem before you can talk about the solutions. Glyphosate. We have to talk about glyphosate. What presentation on pesticides would not be complete without America's formerly #1 most sprayed pesticide? There was a study that found that 95% of Americans who eat exclusively organic tested positive for glyphosate in their urine. Well, there used to be this myth that if you ate only organic, you could avoid all of these different chemicals. The truth is, we live in a toxic world. Again, that's the title of this presentation, How to Thrive in a Toxic World. Your body burden, which is basically the amount of chemicals and toxins and radiation and things of that nature that your body can cope with and still function before things start to go wrong, your body burden with glyphosate is through the roof. And so unfortunately, even if you're eating organically, you're being exposed to glyphosate, as well as dozens of other pesticides that we talked about. There was a study that found that in 2014, 30% of mothers' breast milk actually tested positive for glyphosate. So don't think about that from the mother's point of view. Think about that from the infant's point of view. So if, basically 1 out of every 3, or 3 out of every 10 rather, 3 out of every 10 babies are being exposed to this pesticide in their only source of food. That's terrifying. When you understand that glyphosate is also a potent endocrine disrupting chemical, again, a phthalate, then matters become worse. There's been a lot of headlines over the last 10 years about mothers and pregnant women who are seeking to minimize the exposure to BPA, or what's called bisphenol A. And recently, a lot of plastic bottle companies have been taking BPA out of their plastic. They're moving to BPA free, which isn't necessarily better. There's still bisphenol S, which is potentially even worse according to recent studies. And it looks like some of you guys are asking questions and I can't see them, so I'll pause in a moment and I'll get to those.
They're just discussing back and forth in the room, so you can check the questions afterwards.
Excellent, thank you, Neil. So, exposure to these phthalates is an issue. If you're seeking to minimize exposure to BPA in breast milk, you should also be seeking to minimize exposure to this chemical right here. Now, just an interesting sidebar, and I'm sure throughout today's conversation, I'm going to have a lot of sidebars because I can't help myself. BPA, the reason that there is such a fear around it with, especially with pregnant women, and some people, depending on who you listen to, they will tell you that it's not as big of an issue as they say. You shouldn't be concerned about it. Let me explain why you should be concerned about it. The mother's liver actually has the capacity to what they call inactivate the potency of BPA. It turns it into an inert chemical. The moment that passes through the umbilical cord, it's actually reactivated. So while the mother might test for something like BPA and have low levels, and the doctor might say, well, there's nothing to be concerned about. As soon as the baby is encountering that chemical, there is something to be concerned about. It's actually reactivated, it's very potent, and you're also talking about a much higher body burden because the infant is so small in size. So now back to glyphosate. Glyphosate has been deemed a probable human carcinogen by the World Health Organization. Yet you can walk into any Home Depot, you can walk into any Lowe's Hardware, you can walk into any home improvement store across the country and purchase it for a few bucks. It's almost like, imagine if there was a bomb being sold on the shelves of your average Lowe's Hardware for a few dollars, and anyone could go in and buy that bomb, that weapon. Well, I mean, that's kind of what we're talking about. Obviously, it's different. You just can't blow up, but it's a weapon, and it's an invisible weapon. Is my point? Is that it's being sprayed across the board without consideration for the adverse health effects on human beings or the ecological effects. I want to talk for a minute about glyphosate toxicity. So, as we mentioned, glyphosate is a potent endocrine disrupting chemical. In addition to that, it actually kills liver cells. Your liver is the largest internal body organ, and it's at the front lines of detoxification of anything you're consuming through your beverages, through your food. It's going to, or even for that matter, anything you're putting on your skin. Your liver is going to be processing a lot of that, and so your liver has this tremendous resiliency to a lot of things. I mean, we're constantly throwing carcinogens at it. We're throwing alcohol at it. Most of us are, despite the fact that alcohol is a group 1 carcinogen, up there with mustard gas, up there with arsenic and mercury. Alcohol, and we're specifically talking about ethanol, the type found in alcoholic beverages. And if you don't believe me, go ahead and just pull it up online, type in list of group 1 carcinogens, and you will find that alcoholic beverages are on there. So your body has to deal with these things on a daily or weekly or monthly basis. And it can keep up with a certain amount. As I mentioned, the body wants to heal. It will continue to heal despite what's thrown at it. However, if you're throwing too much at it, it starts to fall further and further behind. So there was a study that I remember reading a long time ago that indicated that the average American who's eating what they call a SAD diet, standard American diet, pun intended, they're consuming conventional produce, they're consuming conventional foods. Glyphosate doesn't go away just because of certain types of processing. So if you're eating a box of crackers, that glyphosate most likely is still active in that box of crackers. So don't think just because, well, I stay away from the produce section, I'm somehow healthier. That's not the case. Unfortunately, it's actually the opposite. And so exposure to various chemicals, they're going to start to accumulate. They call it bioaccumulation. Unfortunately, with glyphosate, it's a perfect storm for toxicity. So not only is it taxing the liver, it's attacking the liver. So it's taxing and attacking the liver. So it's actually killing liver cells, therefore inhibiting the body's functionality to process further amounts. Sorry, I got off on a tangent. What I meant to say a moment ago was that I remember reading a study that found that people who ate a standard American diet are exposed to approximately 1 gallon of pesticides annually. Think about that for just a moment. So, if I gave you a gallon of anything, gallon of water, and I told you to sip it every single day until throughout the course of the year, that gallon was gone. That's effectively how much pesticide, and I don't know how they found that out, but that's effectively how much pesticides we are exposed to on an annual basis. When you take into account the fact that there's a medley of these toxic pesticides, you're effectively turning your body into this chemical cocktail. And so we now need to transition and start saying, well, it's no longer a question of if these things are toxic and if we're being exposed to them. We know that they're toxic and we know that we're being exposed to them. We need to start talking about how do we put pressure on the industries or the government or whoever is going to be starting to limit the use of these things, because this is a human safety issue. Now, I mentioned a moment ago that the World Health Organization has called glyphosate a potential human carcinogen, which to those of us who've researched it is a joke. I'm just going to be frank with you all. We know it's a carcinogen. It's not in question. There's nothing probable about it. It's definite. And so the World Health Organization is very conservative with what they actually say, with what they put their rubber stamp of approval on. They're very susceptible to industry pressure through lobbying and such. But when we look at the independent studies that have been done, it's unequivocal. And so I just want to go through real quick 4 of the known carcinogenic pathways that have been identified with respect to this one chemical, glyphosate. So I'm going to break these down one by one. Mitochondrial disruption, resulting in diminished cellular detoxification. So what that means is in each and every cell in the human body, you have approximately 200 mitochondria at the time of birth. And those mitochondria serve many functions, not the least of which is detoxification for the cell. They also do other things, and we'll get into those a little later on. The mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. That's what they call it. It does so many different things. And mitochondrial health is now kind of the new frontier for overall health. It seems that in a similar regard to the way that science is now getting away from like Newtonian physics and starting to look into the realms of quantum physics and seeing things like scalar energy and all of these other amazing discoveries that have incredible implications for our health and our civilization. We're starting to see the same thing in the healthcare, in the medical establishment. The further and the smaller we go downward on scale, we find that there are increasingly important factors at play. So obviously most people now know about the microbiome. The microbiome is not necessarily a new thing, but I would assert that in public consciousness, it's become a recent revelation in the past like 20 years. And so that's on the microscopic level, and beyond that, if you go within a cell, within an indigenous human body cell, you actually have mitochondria. And so mitochondrial health, I'm just going to leave it there. And if we have questions about this, or if we have time, I can go into it further. Mitochondrial health is critical. So disrupting the mitochondrial health is also critical in a bad way. And so it actually diminishes the ability for the cell to detox. And if you're not detoxing on a cellular level, then there's bioaccumulation of toxins. Now, those bioaccumulation of toxins, that's going to cause one of 2 things. In an ideal environment, the cell would commit suicide, and we call that apoptosis. In item number 2 on screen, you'll see the word apoptosis. That's cellular suicide for all intents and purposes. And it's a fail-safe that the body has evolved to counteract, cancer cell proliferation. And so if you're inhibiting detoxification of the cell and that accumulation builds up, it will typically commit suicide. However, if you look at number 2, glyphosate shuts down that pathway. And so it actually forces the cell to turn into a polyp and then eventually into a tumor. So right there, again, right off the start, we have 2 different powerful pathways that this causes cancer. The third way is amino acid production disruption. Your body is constantly producing amino acids to perform basically every function in the body. And when you're disrupting amino acid production, it's taking different amino acids, it's linking them together. And the analogy that I typically use is, imagine that you were writing a book and I told you that you can't use the letter Q. Well, that inhibits your ability to write certain words. There might be a few typos. However, you can still create pretty much a coherent book. Again, sans a few typos. If I told you that you can't use any of the vowels, well, now that's a different story. That basically, how many words can you spell without vowels? It's very minimal, if at all. And so that's basically what's happening with the essential amino acid linking in the body. And lastly, you have something in your body called a P450 inhibitor. And without getting into all the details, by disrupting the P450 inhibitor, your body is unable to absorb as much nutrition from food. So to do a summary here, you can't absorb as much nutrition, you are accumulating toxins, you can't detox from them, you're forcing cells to proliferate rather than commit suicide, thereby saving your body and your health. And then you're shutting off amino acid linking. It's a perfect storm for cancer. And I really can't impress upon our audience how toxic this stuff is. Now, you could make an argument that there is a 5th pathway or even a 6th, 7th, 8th pathway. And I've heard those arguments. I'm doing my best in this presentation to stick only with the actually like set in stone science. Now there's other science being done on the microbiome. And yes, that is a crucial factor. When you kill the microbiome by being exposed to glyphosate, that's going to impair pretty much everything, as we'll get into in my second presentation. So yes, there are, I'm saying that I'm aware that there's other pathways for carcinogenicity, but let's just stick with what science has actually totally come down on conclusively. Okay, history of glyphosate. The company that we mentioned, Monsanto, they've been around a long time. And around the Vietnam era, the Vietnam War era, they were producing Agent Orange. Now, Agent Orange was actually a combination of a couple of different pesticides, well, they're actually technically herbicides. And why were they doing it? They were producing it for warfare. So in the Vietnam War, they were, as you can see in this picture, spraying large swaths of the Vietnamese jungle with this anti-foliage chemical, which basically revealed different pathways in the jungle, different roadways. And it was in production from about 1962 to about 1975. Around the mid-70s to late 70s, it was banned. It was shown to be very toxic for human health. When you look at the successive generations of the Vietnamese who have been born since this has been dumped across their landscape, it's really heartbreaking. I encourage you to do it, but to do it knowing that there are some graphic pictures. The children who were born, again, we talked about its mutagenicity and the amount of mutations that it has caused in the vicissitudes of Vietnamese populations is really tragic. And Monsanto has a lot of blood on their hands. Now, recently, thankfully, different farmers have been awarded settlements in landmark cases, which means that successive court cases will reflect back to this precedent. They were rewarded, I think, something like over $1 billion for their lawsuits against Monsanto. And so what I think we're going to see over the next 15 years, and I put the number pretty far out there because I think it's imminent, but I don't think it's going to happen tomorrow. But I think over the next 15 years, we're going to see these companies face their reckoning in a legal way. So yeah, so as I mentioned, Agent Orange was a blend of two different pesticides. It was called 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T. They called it a selective broadleaf herbicide, meaning that when you see leaves that have they're symmetrical, so one half of the leaf is the same as the other half, such as trees and certain vines, those were the ones that they were targeting specifically. Unfortunately, the Viet Cong were used as guinea pigs. But hey, it's warfare, right? What does it matter? It's tragic. It's tragic. And unfortunately, I think we're seeing the same thing with glyphosate, and we're being used as guinea pigs now. So yeah, 4.8 million Vietnamese people were exposed to Agent Orange, resulting in 400,000 deaths and disabilities, 500,000 children born with birth defects. So yeah, I think Monsanto has a lot to answer for. So the difference between Agent Orange, which was reformulated and diluted using different surfactants. See, okay, let me just say something real quick as a sidebar. There is pushback from people who either are paid shills, I don't know, or maybe they're just genuinely dismissive of conspiratorial information. They want to push back and say that glyphosate is not as bad as people say it is. It's diluted. Really, when a farmer sprays their field, they're only putting like 2 tablespoons of glyphosate per se on their field, but it's diluted with different surfactants, surfactants being things that are not that dissimilar from your household dishwashing soap. And the reason that they dilute it with that is because it rather than just running off of the plant and running off of the leaves like water would, it actually clings to the leaves and works directly on the plant. So that's why they're not diluting it for any other reason. They're just diluting it so that they can put these other surfactants in there so that it'll actually quote unquote do its job. So you get the people who push back and they're like, well, it's really not that much. Well, we'll get into this a little bit later on, but there are chemicals that are especially toxic at low levels. And glyphosate is one of those chemicals, hands down. We've seen how it works. And, when we're talking about biocides, guess what? Human beings are organisms. So, let me pull back the lens just for a second. Let's talk about why organic farming is so much better. We've done so many different things since the dawn of the agricultural revolution that are suboptimal, to put it mildly. When you're tilling a field to plant some crops, when you're tilling a field to get the rocks out and to loosen the dirt, you're exposing a lot of the anaerobic bacteria to oxygen. That's not necessarily, the end of the world, but it needs to be kept in mind that the integrity of the soil is based on the integrity of the microcosmic ecosystem. And so, in 1 tablespoon of healthy topsoil, you're going to have billions, hundreds of billions of different microorganisms at play. And so if there's no life on a microscopic level, then there's going to be no life on a crop level. And we've gotten away from cover cropping in a lot of ways because we're focusing so much on monocropping, monoculture, what am I trying to say? Monoculture farming, where we're growing one type of plant. You look at an entire field, and it's all GMO corn, for instance. and there's nothing there to compete. And so you've immediately, just by common sense, you've thrown off the healthy and necessary competition, not only between plants and pests, but also within the soil itself. In addition to that, without cover cropping or rotating crops, the worms die off because you're baking the soil in the sunshine. And so naturally there would be what are we call weeds, but really there would just be other plants growing. There would be grass even. There would be something there to block the harsh sun rays and the heat from reaching the soil. So those worms die out. Now, what do the worms do? Well, the worms are the aerators. Now we have all these inventions and contraptions that help us aerate the soil. Worms would do that naturally. So you're eliminating the microbiome of the soil. You're eliminating the worms. And then guess what? What most people don't realize that's really actually related to this issue is that we use dams for hydroelectricity. So think about dams, or think about a river that has typically flowed through a given area for millions of years and has provided that basin with the minerals and nutrients necessary for life. Well, when you have a dam, a lot of those minerals build up behind the dam and the water flows over. And so just something as simple as building these massive dams, like on the Colorado River, the Hoover Dam and others, we are dramatically crippling the farms that are downstream. And I encourage our audience to check that out. That's a topic in and of itself. And so what do? Well, without the minerals there, we actually resort to superphosphate fertilizers and different things like that focus on maybe 3 different minerals, phosphorus, nitrogen, and carbon, and things like that. And by putting those back in the soil, the plant looks healthy. But appearances can be deceiving, and those looks are actually not indicative of the nutrient value of the food. So if you eat one apple that was grown today on a conventional farm, that's been cultivated and everything for hundreds of years, it's going to be 1/10, 1/100th, who knows, of the nutritional value of what your grandparents and great-grandparents were eating. So when you see sickness on the rise today, that's yet another factor. I digress. Okay, let's just talk for a moment about the ecological effects of the global pesticide crisis. So, as you can see in this picture here, in the Midwest, we have a lot of the farms. So in the they used to call it the bread belt. I don't know if they're still calling it the bread belt anymore. But Kansas, Iowa, Ohio, all those states. Historically, we've grown food and we've fed the country there. Now we're growing, GMO sugar beets for polymers for the polyester industry. We're growing GMO corn and GMO soy to feed to our livestock to fatten them up, which is only raising their incidence of E. coli. We're using those same crops like corn for biodiesel to subsidize the oil industry and to to give us the false illusion that we are somehow weaning off of these harsh petrochemicals and transitioning to a sustainable society when there's nothing sustainable about it. There's an important critical point that I want our audience to understand here, which is really going to shape the rest of this conversation. Something that you need to know about glyphosate, if you take one thing away from this conversation other than it's harmful to our health, it is water soluble. So even Monsanto admits that only 10% of glyphosate actually works on the crops, and that the 90% of it that's wasted is either penetrating into the water table or is evaporating up in the air. Now that's according to Monsanto. Water soluble means it's going to be subsumed into the hydrological cycle. It's going to evaporate, It's going to go into the clouds. It's going to rise as moisture and water vapor, which means that when you look at the weather forecast and it says 60% humidity today, what are you breathing in? Are you breathing in H2O, or are you breathing in all of these other things that are riding the water molecules? Of course, once it's in the clouds, it's going to rain down. You're going to have this acid rain that then penetrates it's going to penetrate into the water table. So it's going to poison, the watershed. It's going to poison aquifers. It's also going to enter rivers and streams. An interesting note on that. They say that 80% of glyphosate winds up in the Mississippi River. 80% of the glyphosate sprayed in the country. Well, if you look at the last 90 miles of the Mississippi River, it's known as Cancer Alley. It's actually the most concentrated cancer zone in the world, which means that if you are living in the last 90 miles of the Mississippi River, you pretty much have a death sentence for cancer. Now, that's taking certain things into consideration. If you're detoxifying, if you're living a healthy lifestyle, if you're avoiding the seafood caught in the Mississippi, if you're avoiding seafood in the Gulf of Mexico, if you're avoiding all those different things, then you have a better chance. Generally speaking, most people who live in the last 90 miles of the Mississippi either have cancer themselves or are destined to have cancer. And that's a sad fact. Again, Monsanto has a lot to answer to. In addition to that, there is the largest ocean dead zone right off the coast of the Gulf of Mexico. It's actually now larger than the size of Rhode Island. I heard somebody say it's larger than New Jersey. I don't know if that's true. Here's the bottom line, guys. Pesticides are potent enough as toxins, as mutagens, as carcinogens, as phthalates, as endocrine disruptor chemicals. Once they enter the Gulf, they're going to then be reacting with everything else that's in the water supply. You have the superphosphate fertilizers, as we mentioned. You have petrochemicals, which are basically anything that's oil-based. Think about all of the pharmaceuticals and all of the narcotics that are flushed into the toilet and down into the water supply. There's a near infinite amount of things that can potentially react with these pesticides. And according to people like Dr. Mercola, you get these tertiary chemicals, which are thousands of times more toxic than the original chemicals themselves. We mentioned the pesticide body burden earlier on. Perhaps most importantly, glyphosate affects the liver and the microbiome. There have been independent studies that have looked at how we can safely and efficiently kind of detoxify from these pesticides. Now, we'll get into those in just a minute. And I know that one of our upcoming speakers today, from Touchstone Essentials, he sells a Zile product that is outstanding, and I encourage people to check it out. So one of the things that I came across in my studies is there's a medical paper that was published that looked at this blend of different herbs. Now, some of them are what are called alterative herbs. If people want to research this further, it's basically the word alternative without the N. So it's alterative. And what alteratives do is they modulate the detoxification pathways of the body. They also modulate the nutrient uptake. So when you're eating certain foods that are either bad for you or good for you, it's going to allow your body to safely absorb what it needs to and not absorb what it shouldn't. So this study actually looked at glyphosate specifically. So here we are, guys. We've gotten through the bad. Now let's start talking about the good. There are actionable steps that we can all take to begin to detoxify from these harsh pesticides. The blend that was in the study, and the source is there on the bottom if you guys want to screen grab it or type it in on the National Institutes of Health. If you just go to PubMed, you'll find it. It found that a blend of dandelion, burdock, and barberry works specifically to protect liver cell die-off by up to 89% for 48 hours. So remember in the beginning of the presentation when I mentioned that your liver is at the front lines when it comes to detoxifying foods and toxins? Well, here we go. Your liver cells, when they're exposed to glyphosate, it wipes them out. By taking this blend, by making it a part of your daily or weekly routine, every 2 days, you're going to reap benefits of protecting about 90% of your liver cells from glyphosate specifically. This wasn't some like generic, other pesticide, or like, it's not like they didn't disclose which one they tried it on. They were emphatic that they said, we tested it on the nation's former most used pesticide. There's a lot of other things you can do. Alder buckthorn, radish, milk thistle. Milk thistle is extremely good for supporting the liver. Greater celandine, activated charcoal. Again, zeolite clay, I'd head over to Touchstone Essentials. Bentonite clay, sauerkraut juice, MSM, which is short for methyl sulfuromethane, which is a really bioavailable source of sulfur. And it's an anti-inflammatory. Everybody should be on it, especially athletes, by the way. Manganese. Now, if you're looking at me and you're going, Adam, where the heck am I going to get manganese from? Cloves. So if you use clove powder in your cooking, or if you just want to take clove capsules, cloves are the highest source in the herbal community for manganese. And of course, fulvic acid and humic acid. And I would encourage our audience to just really investigate these companies that they're getting them from. Not all supplements are created equal. And as I mentioned, one of the most significant problems when we're talking about glyphosate or pesticides in general is your microbiome. And we know that it's having an effect. It's wiping out your microbiome. It's basically an antibiotic, which, going back to the first slide, what's another word for antibiotic? Biocide, right? Antibiotic, anti-life. Biocide, killing life, exterminating life. So, it was only really until the last 20 years, where even really the last 10 years, where probiotics began to be a part of the conversation when you visit your doctor. Most doctors still today actually don't even bring it up. In Australia, I don't know if this is still true, but I know for a while it was illegal for a doctor to prescribe antibiotics without also discussing and prescribing probiotic regimen with the patient. We have yet to get there in America. So as far as all of the questions on the microbiome, even though it's totally relevant to this conversation, I'm just going to save that for the next presentation, which it looks like we might have some questions, so I can pause here before we roll into the other discussion. How's everybody doing so far? How am I doing so far?
You're doing great, Adam. Lots of engagement, lots of people really appreciating this information. Looks like the one question we have is from somebody asking about something that was on the bottom of the screen. So I'm not sure what they were asking about. If Jerry,
go ahead. I got it right here. Yeah. I got the question right here. Let's do this question. Actually, let me just say this really quick, guys. Let's answer this question, Adam, and then we have one presenter who's only here for 5 minutes, so we're gonna have him come on and just say some stuff real quick, and then we're gonna get back into it because I want to do a glyphosate discussion. If you guys are open to that, and then we can go back and forth. So this question is, let's see here. After about 50 years, are there any lasting effects showing up today? And if so, what are the details? And she means in reference to the lands in Vietnam.
Ah, interesting. So the question is, are there still effects, like adverse effects in the human population in Vietnam today?
Yes, exactly.
Well, to be frank, I don't know. And here's a part of a larger conversation. When we're talking about mutagens, we're talking about heritable traits. So it's a separate conversation from epigenetics, right? Because epigenetics are, you have certain gene markers that are turned on or turned off uh, throughout the course of your life by environmental exposure to different stimuli. When we're talking about mutagens, we're talking about something different. We're actually talking about affecting the DNA, right? These are actually changing the DNA to express itself differently, and that is heritable, which basically just means that you will inherit those genes from your parents. Now, there is some evidence, albeit this is a whole territory that is woefully inadequate in investigation so far at this current time of recording. There is some evidence that suggests over successive generations, many of these mutations will correct themselves. Now, as far as how many generations, as far as the percentage of damage that will be healed, as far as certain things that you have, tools, foods, herbs that you have at your disposal to help the body heal, we just haven't seen those studies done yet. And so I can't answer the question directly, but I can say that yes, these are unequivocally heritable traits. And I don't know, can you guys
That's
see
true.
me? I don't
Yeah,
know if you can see me.
yeah, we can see you, but you can stop your presentation so we can see you full screen. Yeah, and I would say that there's been reports of Agent Orange that the U.S. military members actually got exposed to, and generational sicknesses, afterwards have come from that. So there's definitely like some research out there.